Hi, welcome to the We Give Summit, a lightning talk on disaster giving, ways to impact women, children, and vulnerable communities in crisis. I'm Sandra Walter, Director of Development at Airlink. We're an international humanitarian and disaster response organization that removes the barriers to response that are caused by logistical challenges and the cost of transportation. I'm pleased to be with you and talk a little bit more about disaster giving. One of the things I think it's important to understand at the outset is the four phases of disaster and emergency response. Let's start with preparedness, and the key thing here is that the relief organizations that you're supporting may support various stages or multiple stages. And it's important to know and think about where they fit into the life cycle of disaster response. Preparedness, making sure that communities that are most vulnerable year over year have the resources that they need, have the trained personnel, have partners with relief organizations around the country or around the world who can help when a disaster happens. This is getting ready for what is eventually going to occur based on past history. Response. This is the phase that most people are familiar with. It's the immediate aftermath of a disaster. It's search and rescue. It's helping people find emergency shelter. It's helping emergency medical teams get in, and it's also making sure people have food to eat and clean water while they are assessing what the damage is and how to move forward. A response phase of a disaster can last 2 weeks, 2 months. It can last over a year. It all depends on the size, the complexity, and the nature of the disaster. And again, important for you to understand what the specialty is of the organizations that you're supporting. For any one disaster, we want to look and make sure that all areas are covered over the life cycle of the disaster. Response leads us to recovery, again, where response ends, recovery picks up, and that's about a community that is starting to stabilize, look to the future, and is looking at repairing, rebuilding, recovering. Many response organizations also do recovery efforts, but there are also organizations that specialize in recovery, such as muck and gut cleaning of housing that's been flooded out, helping people find long-term placement for themselves, helping people look for jobs and have economic means in order to be able to support their families, helping schools get going again. Recovery phase, very important in the life cycle. And then that leads us to mitigation. How do we prevent these things from happening? Certainly with the situation around climate change, it's something everyone is looking to, and so much work is being done in that area on a macro level, but on a micro level in communities, particularly, again, those vulnerable, looking at how do we make sure that structures are sound if it's an earthquake zone? How do we make sure that if housing is rebuilt in a floodplain, that it's built high enough up so that water comes under or stops before it reaches people's homes? Again, the four phases, and something I think it's important to take a look at as a lens on the organizations you're supporting and the disasters you're responding to. We live in an unprecedented global situation, over 56 active civil conflicts, 387 natural hazards and disasters, leaving 100 million people plus displaced and 365 million people facing famine. Clearly, disasters are occurring every day, large and small, and because of compromised systems caused by these long-term repetitive disasters and by the civil conflicts that also affect them, there is a need for humanitarian aid and support on a regular and routine basis. I want to make you aware of two types of disasters, again, as you're thinking about your giving. One is ongoing disasters, complex humanitarian crises, often caused by conflict that have compromised health systems, roads, water filtration systems, the ability for people to go to school and people to earn a living. Again, complex humanitarian crises that are exacerbated when there is a climate change, natural disaster, rapid response, onset disaster that happens in a region that further magnifies the need for humanitarian aid. What are the most critical needs when there is a humanitarian disaster response? First and foremost, medical supplies, clean water, shelter, food, transportation, rescue teams, sanitation systems. It's both the material aid and it's the experts, volunteers, and professionals to help implement them. Children. There are so many risk factors, but particularly for those children who live in underserved or marginalized communities, are living in poverty or living in existing conflict zones, when a disaster happens, the risk to them and their well-being is exacerbated. After a disaster, there is trauma that children experience from being an eyewitness during a disaster of everything from trees falling and the sounds of glass breaking, loved ones who are injured or killed, homes are destroyed, and far too often kids may be separated from their families, and that separation anxiety that can exist long term. There's the exposure to violence that can occur, and child trafficking is a real issue. There are organizations that can come in during a disaster to help make sure that all of the relief organizations and the communities that exist are helping to address and prevent child trafficking. Children face lifetime deficits from having gone through a disaster, and the recovery process is so important to getting them back on track. They face psychological, physical, and educational deficits that, if not addressed, again, can lead to long-term implications. During the recovery phase, children may be living in temporary conditions that are unfamiliar with them. Parents are in search of jobs, and there's the instability and issues that their families are facing from not having economic security. They may be moving away from friends and people they know, their support system. They may be missing school because the schools aren't operating because they too were damaged, and teachers are working on taking care of their own children and their own families at the same time. Then, of course, there's the going to a new school and all that that brings for any child, regardless of the situation. They may have experienced death in the family or extreme illness as a result of the disaster. And don't underestimate what the impact is of family pets that are lost, whether they are animals that are used to help sustain the family, where agriculture and farming is the life cycle and lifeblood of people's existence, or whether it's a pet that they've had since they were a child and is missing, and the child is concerned about that. What affects children affects women, of course, and vice versa. Key risk factors to think about after a disaster for women is, what were the cultural risk factors to begin with? Women's place in society, women's ability to earn their own income and take care of their own families, clothing issues that women need to be modestly dressed and therefore want to ensure that they continue to protect that concern of theirs and that cultural responsibility that they feel that they have. Pregnancy certainly compromises women during a disaster. Lack of support, the pressure and anxiety that comes from dealing with a disaster can have early onset labor, economic issues, taking care of their families, and of course the violence that does occur when people are in this kind of compromised situation. Risk factors also for recovery include, loss of a home, loss of income, loss of family children, and children who may have died during the course of the disaster, limited access to healthcare for them and their family, substandard housing. They're now sharing housing in tents with multiple people who they may not know, changing their way of living and living with strangers, quite frankly, and a lack of childcare that provides the underpinning for them to be able to help their families by looking for jobs and helping support the community's recovery. Some of the biggest challenges in disaster response, I want to mention two of them. One is that 73% of the resources during a humanitarian program or response is related to what we call the supply chain. That's procurement of aid that's needed, and it's also transportation logistics to get the aid where it's needed. It's not aid if it doesn't get there, and donated aid does not usually come with donated dollars to pay for the transportation to get it there. It's why it's so important to consider funding transportation and logistics as part of your disaster response giving program. The other thing I want to caution you about is when disasters happen, people want to help. Good, willing people doing good things, collecting goods to be able to send in a donation box. But I want to share with you, this is not the way to go, and I want you to discourage those that you know in your community from trying to do collections. 60% of what's collected is waste. It doesn't have an organization on the ground to be able to manage the influx of aid. It may not be the right aid. Quilts and teddy bears are lovely, but the fact, as I said before, it's medical aid that's needed. It's water filtration systems. It's solar power, specific things that are needed at specific points in a disaster, that there are organizations that are well positioned to be able to ensure not just that the goods are procured, but as importantly, they reach the people who need them in the right way and have the programs to support them. A few programs I want to mention that I think you'll be interested in that are supporting women and children. Project Camp, which provides trauma-informed childcare, partnering with local elementary schools. We Care Solar, that designs, produces, and delivers solar suitcases to the last mile. Health facilities enabling midwives and doctors to make sure that there's effective maternal and newborn care, particularly where there is no electricity to light the night. And Water with Blessings, that helps create water women who can provide clean water for up to 4 families and manage, build, and sustain bucket and filter materials to build an inexpensive home-based filtration system. Again, one of the key things is think about it as water filtration systems and the people to set them up, not bottled water. AirLink is all about the right aid, right time, right place, and we want you to consider adopting that as your mantra as well. Removing the barriers to NGO response through logistical challenges and the high cost of transportation. That's the work that we do for over 150 relief organizations around the world. It's a complex thing to get aid into a community in crisis. It requires relief organizations who have the expertise and the skilled personnel and the aid that needs to arrive. It requires airlines and other transportation and donors to support the ability to get aid there. It requires an organization like AirLink that vets all of its relief partners and ensures that the aid that is needed gets where it needs to go as efficiently, environmentally responsibly, and quickly as possible to reach communities in crisis. These are some of AirLink's 150 partners. It grows with every response. These organizations have been vetted for effectiveness, efficiency. They have first and last mile plans. AirLink only sends things that go from NGOs, relief organizations, to relief organizations in the communities. And it's based on what communities need, not just what we think they want to have. An example of this is the recent Turkey-Syria earthquake, where AirLink has already sent 200 responders and 950 tons of supplies for 21 relief organizations, many of whom otherwise would not have had the means financially to be able to go in and help. We currently have over 800 tons of supplies in the pipeline for this one disaster alone, and currently AirLink is responding to over 15 disasters around the world. Our impact over the last 12 years has meant over $20 million in transportation support provided to relief organizations serving over 70 countries. As you think about how and when you fund, I want you to think about funding patterns during and between disasters. As you can see from this chart, there are often these peaks that exist, these surges when a particular response happens and people see it on the news and hear about it and may have a connection to that country and want to help. But the question is, what happens in the in-between time? What happens when organizations need to spend resources on preparedness, right? And on recovery after that initial surge. Operations support is incredibly important to make sure that organizations are well managed, well seasoned, and well able to respond when that disaster occurs. Ways you can help: consider helping smooth the curve with advanced funding of those organizations that you think are effective and meet your interests and passions. Then consider additional surge support when a disaster happens, so they have the additional resources that they need to reach those communities in crisis. Consider how you can leverage the connections you have, and consider how you can sound out on social media to help leverage your influence to help these organizations raise more support and more awareness for what they do. As you craft your plan, vet organizations, make sure that they are responsible, ethical, and effective responders. Make sure that they meet the environmental effectiveness and awareness that you're interested in as well. Consider unrestricted giving and also capacity building support. Please don't forget transportation logistics support. It is such a significant piece of any disaster response. And think about what the needs are and what the opportunities are to help help people in a disaster based on the geography and cultural norms of that country. Consider helping support both complex crises and rapid onset disasters. I want to thank you for your time and being part of the We Give Summit. I want to thank you for being a generous humanitarian disaster response supporter and for all you do throughout the year and what you do when specific disasters happen that incite you to deliver your passion for giving. Please feel free to reach out. I'll look forward to meeting you down the line. And again, have a great summit. Thank you.